The broken promise. Why education won't save you in a system that wasn't built for you. Thank you all for being here today. I'm truly honored to stand before you to share some profound insights I gained from my recent interview with Rosalyn Casey, a visionary researcher and fearless advocate whose work has fundamentally transformed how we understand the intersection of race, gender, and economic opportunity in America. Rosen isn't just collecting data, she's illuminating truths that many would prefer to keep hidden. Her groundbreaking research has forced institutions to confront their biases, compelled policymakers to rethink outdated frameworks, and given voice to millions of women whose experiences have been systematically erased from our national conversation about success and opportunity. I want to begin with something that might shock you. Despite being the most educated demographic in America, Black women remain drastically underrepresented in leadership roles and face some of the highest barriers to economic advancement. Let that sink in for a moment. The most educated group in our country still faces the steepest climb to leadership and financial security. This shatters one of our most cherished American myths that education is the great equalizer. That if you just work hard enough, get enough degrees, collect enough credentials, the doors of opportunity will swing wide open. For generations, we've told ourselves this comforting story. We've built entire institutions around this premise. We've counseled our children that education is the guaranteed path to success. It's a beautiful story. It's a reassuring story. It's also a lie. What Rosalind Casey's research reveals is something far more disturbing than we want to admit. For Black women in America, the equation isn't working as promised. The system isn't just broken, it's functioning exactly as it was designed, just not for everyone. When we look at the data, the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Between 2017 and 2024, the number of businesses owned by Black women surged by over 40%, making them one of America's fastest growing entrepreneurial groups. As of 2024, nearly 2.7 million US businesses are owned by Black women. This is remarkable growth by any standard. But why this explosive growth in entrepreneurship? Is it simply an expression of ambition and innovation? Partly, yes. But dig deeper, and a more complex truth emerges. This entrepreneurial boom isn't just about business opportunity, it's a response to exclusion from traditional pathways. It's about creating alternatives when existing systems fail to provide equitable access to advancement. It's about survival. Black women have faced persistent exclusion from corporate ladders, limited access to investment capital, and systemic underrepresentation in leadership. Despite being highly credentialed, again, the most educated demographic, according to national statistics, traditional workplaces often demanded conformity or offered little room for advancement. So they built their own platforms. They launched businesses out of necessity as well as ambition. They created spaces where their identities were assets rather than obstacles. And in doing so, they've surpassed all other groups' growth rates in entrepreneurship, inspiring broader conversations about representation and equity across industries. This is what happens when talent meets barrier after barrier. It doesn't disappear, it redirects. It finds new channels, it creates new possibilities. But we shouldn't romanticize this resilience without acknowledging the cost. The need to create alternative pathways comes at a price: emotional, financial, and societal. Creating your own path means walking without maps, building without blueprints, succeeding without safety nets. Let's look at another troubling piece of evidence. Recent reports reveal that gender pay disparities for Black women remain stagnant into 2025 despite increased educational attainment. The average Black woman with a bachelor's degree earns less than a white man with only a high school diploma. Let that sink in. 4 years of college, tens of thousands in student debt, and still earning less than someone who never set foot on a university campus. Systemic issues such as occupational segregation, the motherhood penalty, and racial bias continue to be entrenched obstacles impacting earnings potential. Black women's labor market participation has historically been high but undervalued, a legacy traced back through generations facing compounded oppressions at work. Despite persistent advocacy keeping this issue visible on public agendas, progress on closing wage gaps remains painfully slow. There's a continued need for intersectional solutions targeting both race and gender discrimination simultaneously. This highlights the urgency for multi layered reforms benefiting not only individuals, but also families relying on equitable income streams. When we fail to address these disparities, we're not just shortchanging individuals, we're perpetuating intergenerational inequity. The third piece of this puzzle concerns representation in leadership and decision making roles. As recently as April 2025, data shows record numbers of diverse female legislators, including more seats held by Black women. But overall, representation still lags significantly behind population proportion. Even with historic election gains after years long grassroots organizing efforts, structural barriers persist within political institutions, limiting further advancement or influence relative to population size. These advances build upon decades long struggles against disenfranchisement dating back before Voting Rights Act. Reforms, with each milestone reflecting both hard won victories and ongoing challenges ahead. The broader impact includes shifting public perception about who belongs at decision making tables and strengthening coalition building efforts across lines of race, gender, and class. But the gap between achievement and representation remains stubbornly wide. So, what are we to make of all this? What does it mean when our most educated demographic still faces the steepest barriers to advancement? It means we need to reconsider our fundamental assumptions about how success works in America. It means we need to look beyond individual achievement and examine the systems that determine whose achievements are recognized and rewarded. The entrepreneurial surge among Black women isn't just a business story, it's a response to exclusion from traditional pathways and a means of building generational wealth, community power, and self determination. It's about creating alternatives when existing systems fail to provide equitable access to advancement. Systemic inequities like pay gaps and rising unemployment rates continue to disproportionately impact Black women, even as they lead in education attainment, demonstrating that structural change is urgently needed. And while there are record gains for Black women in areas like state legislatures and business ownership, true equity requires closing persistent gaps in leadership positions across all industries. This is the broken promise, the false assurance that credentials alone will overcome systemic barriers. The data tells us otherwise. The lived experiences of millions of Black women tell us otherwise. But there's another side to this story, one of remarkable resilience, innovation, and determination. When faced with systems that weren't built for them, Black women haven't simply accepted exclusion. They've created alternatives, they've built businesses, run for office, advocated for policy changes, created support networks, and continued pushing for transparency and equity. As Rosalind Casey so powerfully stated during our interview, when the system fails Black women don't fail. They build their own. This isn't just about identifying problems. It's about recognizing the innovative solutions already emerging from communities most affected by these disparities. It's about learning from those who've had to navigate and overcome systemic barriers and applying those lessons to create more equitable systems for everyone. So, where do we go from here? How do we move beyond the broken promise toward genuine equity? First, we need to acknowledge that individual achievement, while important, cannot alone overcome systemic barriers. We need policy changes, institutional reforms, and cultural shifts that address the root causes of disparities. Second, we need to recognize and support the alternative pathways being created by those excluded from traditional routes to success. This means investing in Black women owned businesses, supporting diverse candidates for public office, and amplifying voices that have been historically marginalized. Third, we need to redefine success itself. If our current metrics of achievement consistently undervalue the contributions of entire demographics, perhaps the problem isn't with those demographics, but with our metrics. And finally, we need to ask ourselves some hard questions about the systems we participate in and perpetuate. Are we contributing to environments that demand conformity rather than celebrating diversity? Are we recognizing and rewarding talent in all its forms, or only when it fits our preconceived notions of what leadership looks like? I stand before you today not just to share these troubling realities, but to issue a challenge to reject the comfortable lie that education alone can overcome centuries of systemic inequality, a challenge to examine your own power and privilege within these systems, a challenge to move beyond awareness to action. Because the truth is, this isn't someone else's problem to solve. This is our collective responsibility. Every time we perpetuate the myth that hard work and education guarantee success, we gaslight millions whose lived experiences tell a different story. Every time we celebrate individual success stories without acknowledging the exceptional barriers they overcame, we normalize those barriers rather than dismantling them. Today, I'm asking you to do something uncomfortable. I'm asking you to question the systems you benefit from. I'm asking you to listen, truly listen, to those who have been telling us for generations that the playing field isn't level. And then I'm asking you to act in your workplace, in your community, in your sphere of influence to create the equity that our current systems have failed to deliver. The broken promise of education isn't just a problem for Black women, it's a symptom of a society that continues to waste tremendous human potential because of outdated biases and structural inequities. And until we address it, we all lose. The time for polite conversations is over. The time for meaningful change is now. Will you be part of it?